The Baroness poisoned her tea, but the maid drank it and the truth came out. The maid wasn't supposed to see it. The ballroom of Thornfield Manor blazed with 1,000 candles. Each flame multiplied in crystal chandeliers until the entire room seemed ablaze with liquid gold. Silks whispered. Jewels caught the light. The orchestra swelled with Strauss as England's finest celebrated the Duke's engagement. Yet at the edges of all that brilliance, pressed against damask wallpaper with a silver tray balanced in trembling hands, stood a figure who didn't belong to their world at all. Alara Ashton, 19 years old, 3 months in service, moved through the glittering crowd like smoke, present but unseen, necessary but invisible, until the moment her eyes locked on something that made her blood turn to ice. Baroness Vivian Ashford, emerald silk, diamond tiara, a smile sharp enough to cut glass, stood beside the refreshment table. Her hand moved with practiced elegance as she lifted a small crystal vial. The movement was smooth, rehearsed, perfect. The clear liquid disappeared into the Duke's tea with barely a ripple. Alara's heart stopped. The silver tray in her hands rattled as her fingers began to shake. Poison. The word echoed in her mind like a death knell. And as the Duke reached for that cup, preparing to toast his future, Alara realized something that would change her life forever. No one would believe her. A maid of 3 months against a baroness who'd known the Duke for years? She might as well be shouting into the void. But silence meant watching him die. Oh, astonishing, isn't it? But before we reveal how this incredible moment came to be, I have a question for you. Do you believe that destiny is written in the stars, or do we make it ourselves? Let me know in the comments below, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? I love reading you stories. Now, settle in, hit that subscribe button to join our family, and let me tell you the truth about what really happened. When words won't save him, time fractured into crystalline shards. Alara watched the Duke's hand close around the poisoned cup. Those long fingers, adorned with the signet ring of his house, lifting the delicate porcelain to his lips. Around him, the cream of Victorian society raised their own glasses, preparing for the toast that would seal his engagement to Lady Catherine Blackwood. She could shout, scream a warning across the ballroom floor. But Alara had learned in her 3 months at Thornfield Manor exactly what happened when servants spoke out of turn. Last month, a footman had dared to correct a visiting countess about the vintage of wine being served. He'd been dismissed before dessert was cleared. His word, his truth, had meant nothing against aristocratic certainty. What would happen if she, a nobody from the rookeries of East London, accused Baroness Vivian Ashford of attempted murder? She'd be dragged from the manor as a hysteric, a troublemaker, a girl with delusions of importance who dared to slander her betters. The Baroness would express shock and dismay. The Duke would drink his tea, and by morning, he'd be dead while Alara rotted in debtor's prison for the crime of trying to save him. Her eyes darted to the Baroness, who stood with perfect posture near the French doors, her face arranged in an expression of pleasant interest. But Alara had spent her whole life reading the faces of people who thought she didn't matter. She saw the tension in the Baroness's jaw, the way her gloved fingers curled too tightly around her own glass, the predatory focus in her eyes as she watched the Duke. This woman had planned murder, and she'd done it in plain sight because she knew no one watched servants closely enough to see what they saw. The Duke raised the cup higher. The orchestra reached a crescendo. In seconds, he would drink. Alara's mind raced through impossible calculations. She couldn't stop him with words. She'd never reach him in time to knock the cup away, and even if she did, she'd be restrained before she could explain. The accident cleaned up, a fresh cup poured. There was only one way to prove the tea was poisoned. Only one form of evidence that couldn't be dismissed or denied. Her own body. The thought dropped into her consciousness like a stone into still water, sending ripples of terror through every nerve. But beneath the fear ran something else, something clear and cold and absolutely certain. If she did nothing, he would die. If she spoke, no one would listen. But if she drank... Elara set her silver tray on a side table with hands that had gone numb. Her legs felt distant as she began to move, weaving through the clusters of silk and superfine wool, navigating by instinct because her vision had narrowed to a single point. The Duke and the poisoned cup rising toward his lips. She had perhaps 10 seconds. Her feet moved faster. A dowager complained as Elara brushed past her. A baron frowned at the maid who dared to hurry through his conversation. But Elara couldn't slow. 5 seconds. The Duke's lips parted. The toast was beginning. Around him, 100 voices prepared to echo his words. 3 seconds. Elara broke into a run for the last few steps. Unthinkable behavior that would see her dismissed on the spot if this failed, and her foot caught deliberately on the edge of the Persian carpet. She went down hard, her trajectory carefully calculated to crash directly into the Duke's arm. The cup flew from his hand. China shattered against marble with a sound like a gunshot. Poison tea spread in a dark stain across pristine white stone. The orchestra stuttered to a halt. 100 conversations died mid-sentence. And Elara, sprawled on the floor at the Duke's feet, looked up to find his gray eyes fixed on her with an expression of startled concern. "My lord, I'm so terribly sorry." She scrambled to her knees, playing the clumsy maid perfectly. Her hands shook as she reached for the broken shards. "Please, let me. Are you hurt?" The Duke's voice was deeper than she'd expected, touched with genuine worry rather than aristocratic irritation. "No, my lord, I just..." Elara's eyes found the spilled tea, then tracked to the refreshment table where a footman was already moving to pour another cup. Her window was closing. "Please, allow me to fetch you afresh." She didn't let him answer, couldn't let him answer, because if someone else poured that tea, she'd have no way to ensure it came from the same poison pot. Elara pushed to her feet and hurried to the table, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The footman, Michael, who'd been kind to her in the servants' hall, already had the Duke's cup in hand. "I'll take it," Elara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm the one who spilled his lordship's drink. I should be the one to replace it." Michael hesitated, but Elara had already lifted the cup from his hands. The same poisoned pot the Baroness had tainted. She turned back toward the Duke, walking carefully across the ballroom floor while every eye in the room tracked her movement. She'd never been so visible in her entire life. The weight of their stares felt like physical pressure against her skin. The Duke waited where she'd left him, his expression unreadable. He'd removed his jacket and draped it over a nearby chair, as though settling in to deal with this unusual interruption properly. Elara approached with the cup extended. Her hands shook, not from acting now but from genuine terror, because she knew what came next, had known from the moment she'd made her choice. "Your tea, my lord." Her voice came out steady despite everything. "With my deepest apologies for the disruption." The Duke reached for the cup, and Elara pulled it back. For just a second, confusion crossed his aristocratic features. Around them, whispers began. Scandalized murmurs about the maid who'd caused chaos and now refused to serve properly. Elara looked up into the Duke's gray eyes. She thought about her mother, dead these 5 years. About the cramped room she shared with 3 other maids in the servants' quarters. About a life lived in shadows and silence, where her observations and thoughts and very existence mattered to absolutely no one. She thought about the Baroness, so certain that servants were blind. And then Elara raised the Duke's cup to her own lips. "Wait," the Duke began. But she'd already drunk deep, draining half the poisoned tea in desperate gulps before anyone could stop her. The effect was immediate. Fire blazed down her throat. Her stomach convulsed. The cup slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers and shattered. A second time tonight, she thought with strange clarity, against the marble. Elara tried to speak, tried to force out the words that would explain everything, but her tongue had gone thick and useless in her mouth. Her vision blurred at the edges, darkening like a closing iris. She felt herself falling. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. The Duke's hands, she realized distantly. He was shouting something. The ballroom erupted in screams and chaos. But all Alara could focus on was forcing out the words. The truth. The reason she was dying. The Baroness. Her voice came out in a rattling whisper. Blood, she tasted blood. Poison. Your tea. I saw her. Meant for you. The Duke's face swam above her. Shock and horror and dawning understanding written across his features. I drank it. Alara's body convulsed, arching in agony. To prove. Then the darkness took her completely. But she'd done it. Dozens had watched her drink from the Duke's cup. Dozens had seen her collapse. The truth couldn't be buried now. Not when it was written in her dying body for all the world to see. Alara's last conscious thought, as the poison dragged her down into nothing, was a strange sense of peace. For the first time in her 19 years, someone was finally paying attention. Alara's body hit the marble floor with a sickening crack that echoed through the sudden silence. Then the screams began. The Duke caught her thrashing form, cradling her head as convulsions racked through her small frame. Her back arched violently, muscles seizing in rhythms that looked almost inhuman. Foam flecked her lips, pink with blood where she'd bitten through her tongue. Get Dr. Whitmore. The Duke's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Now! Ladies fainted. Gentlemen stumbled backward, creating a widening circle around the dying maid. The orchestra had abandoned their instruments entirely. Someone was sobbing. Someone else was praying. But the Duke didn't move. He held Alara as her body convulsed, one hand supporting her neck, the other pressing against her chest as if he could will her heart to keep beating through force of touch alone. What did she say? Lady Margaret Thornberry pushed through the crowd, her face pale. Before she collapsed, what did the girl say? She said. The Duke's jaw tightened. His eyes tracked across the ballroom, searching. She accused someone of poisoning my tea. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled nobility. But Alara barely heard it. The world had reduced to fire and ice, to the feeling of her organs shutting down one by one. Her vision had narrowed to a pinpoint of light surrounded by encroaching darkness. Through the haze she saw the Baroness, still standing by the French doors, but her mask had slipped. Where moments ago there had been practiced elegance, now there was barely concealed panic. The Baroness's gloved hand clutched at her throat. Her eyes darted toward the exits. The Duke saw it too. His gaze locked on Baroness Vivian with the focused intensity of a predator spotting prey. No one leaves this ballroom, he commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority despite the dying girl in his arms. Guards, seal the doors. Dr. Whitmore will examine that teapot. And someone fetch the magistrate. Alara's body gave one final, violent convulsion. Then she went terrifyingly still. The Duke's fingers found her throat, pressing desperately for a pulse. For a long moment, the entire ballroom held its breath. She's alive, he breathed. Barely, but alive. He lifted Alara's limp form as easily as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. Blood stained his pristine white shirt. Her head lolled against his shoulder. Clear the way, the Duke ordered, striding toward the door with purpose. If this girl dies because of someone's ambition, I swear before God there will be a reckoning. The Duke's private chambers had never held a dying servant before. The scandal of it rippled through Thornfield Manor like shockwaves, but he didn't care. He laid Alara on his own bed, silk sheets and goose-down pillows, and refused to leave even as Dr. Whitmore arrived with his leather bag and grim expression. Arsenic, the physician confirmed after examining Alara's symptoms. Classic presentation. Burning throat, convulsions, the metallic taste she would have experienced. He pulled out a vial of thick white liquid. We need to induce vomiting immediately, then activated charcoal. Even then, Your Grace, the prognosis is poor. She ingested a substantial amount. Then work quickly. The Duke held Alara's hand as Dr. Whitmore began the brutal process of purging the poison. She convulsed again, unconscious but suffering, and the Duke's jaw clenched so tightly it ached. While the physician worked, the Duke's mind worked faster. He summoned his head of household, Mr. Pemberton, who arrived looking shaken. "The teapot," the Duke said without preamble. "The one from which that girl's cup was poured. I want it sealed and brought here immediately. No one touches it except Dr. Whitmore." "Already done, Your Grace. I took the liberty the moment you gave orders to seal the ballroom." Pemberton produced the china pot, wrapped carefully in linen. "The magistrate has also arrived and is questioning the guests." "Good. Now tell me about the girl." "Alara Ashton, my lord. 19. Been in service here 3 months. Came from the East End with excellent references from the parish there." "Her character?" Pemberton hesitated, clearly uncomfortable discussing a servant with such seriousness. "Impeccable, Your Grace. Quiet, hard-working, never a complaint from the senior staff. She keeps to herself mostly, but the other maids speak well of her. Honest to a fault, they say." The Duke looked at Alara's pale face, slack in unconsciousness as Dr. Whitmore continued his ministrations. An honest girl. An invisible girl. The kind of girl who saw everything because no one bothered to hide things from her. "I want every servant in this house questioned," he said quietly. "Not by the magistrate, by you, Pemberton. Servants talk to servants. I want to know everything about Baroness Vivian's movements today. Who she spoke with, where she went, who had access to the tea service." "Your Grace, surely you don't believe that girl drank poison meant for me." The Duke's voice was hard as iron. "She did it because she knew no one would believe her accusation otherwise. That kind of desperate courage doesn't come from malice or madness. It comes from seeing something terrible and having no other way to prove the truth." 3 days and nights blurred together in the Duke's chambers. The household whispered scandal, their lord nursing a common maid, refusing to leave her bedside, canceling all appointments and social obligations. Lady Catherine, his fiancée, came once to protest and was turned away at the door, but the Duke barely noticed. His world had narrowed to the rhythm of Alara's breathing, the fever that burned through her small body, the moments when she thrashed in delirium and he had to hold her down so she wouldn't hurt herself. Dr. Whitmore came and went, administering antidotes and palliatives, shaking his head grimly each time. "It's in God's hands now, Your Grace. The poison has damaged her organs. Even if she survives, there may be lasting effects." On the second night, Alara's fever peaked. She burned so hot the Duke could feel the heat radiating from her skin. She muttered in her delirium, fragments of memory, pieces of a life he knew nothing about. "Mama, I tried. Couldn't save her." Her hand clutched at empty air. "So cold in winter. 3 of us in one bed." The Duke dampened cloth after cloth in cool water, pressing them to her forehead, her wrists, her throat. His hands, accustomed to signing legislation and holding reins, learned the delicate work of nursing. He read to her from his library poetry, philosophy, novels, because Dr. Whitmore said familiar voices could anchor the delirious. Between the bedside vigils, he worked. The teapot had been analyzed, arsenic confirmed, enough to kill a man twice over. Pemberton brought daily reports from his investigation of the servants. A picture began to emerge, the Baroness meeting with strangers in the garden. Sealed letters delivered to her rooms. A visit to an apothecary in a questionable part of London. But it was the footman, Michael, who provided the most damning evidence. He came to the Duke's chambers wringing his cap, terrified but determined. "I saw her, Your Grace, the Baroness. She asked me special to serve the tea service for your toast." Said she wanted everything perfect for your engagement. I thought nothing of it then, but she stood right by that pot for near 5 minutes while I was arranging glasses. Alone. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Michael's face crumpled. Who listens to a footman, my lord? But then Alara, Miss Ashton. She nearly died proving what she saw. If she's brave enough to drink poison, I reckon I can be brave enough to speak. That was when the Duke understood. Alara hadn't just saved his life. She'd shattered the silence that protected predators in positions of power. On the third night, Alara's fever finally broke. The Duke, dozing in the chair beside her bed, jerked awake as she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, brown eyes. He noticed for the first time the color of aged whiskey in firelight. She stared at him in confusion, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings, the fine linens, the Duke himself with 3 days' worth of stubble and rumpled clothing. You're alive, he said, and his voice cracked with relief he hadn't known he was holding. Alara tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Every muscle in her body screamed protest. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed broken glass. Easy. The Duke's hand steadied her, surprisingly gentle. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Dr. Whitmore says you're lucky to be alive. Memory crashed back in fragments. The ballroom, the poison, the taste of bitter tea and then fire, so much fire. She'd drunk it. She'd actually drunk it. The Baroness. Her voice came out as a harsh rasp. Is currently under house arrest pending formal charges. The Duke poured water from a crystal pitcher, held the glass to her lips, along with several co-conspirators. Thanks to you. Alara drank gratefully, though even water hurt going down. When she could speak again, she asked, Why am I in your chambers? Because I refused to let them take you anywhere else. He said it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You saved my life, Miss Ashton. The least I could do was ensure the best possible care for yours. The scandal of it struck her suddenly. A maid, in the Duke's private rooms, for 3 days. Her reputation, what little a servant girl had, would be destroyed. The Duke seemed to read her thoughts. Don't worry about the gossip. Your character is beyond reproach. Everyone knows you're here because of your injuries, and because I insisted. If anyone suggests otherwise, they'll answer to me personally. He settled back in his chair, and Alara noticed the exhaustion in his face, the wrinkled clothing, the way his hair stood up as if he'd been running his hands through it. Had he been here the whole time? I need to understand, the Duke said quietly. Why did you do it? You must have known the poison could kill you. Alara looked at her hands, calloused and rough against the silk sheets. Because no one would have believed me, my lord. A maid accusing a baroness? I'd have been dismissed as a troublemaker or worse. But if I drank it myself, she met his eyes. The evidence would be impossible to deny. You gambled your life on my ability to piece together the truth. I gambled my life on the idea that my life mattered enough to investigate. She said it without bitterness, just stating a fact. Servants see everything, my lord. We're invisible to people like the Baroness. She had meetings in the garden with men I didn't recognize. She received sealed letters that made her angry. I saw her at the apothecary in Whitechapel last week, though she told your household she was shopping on Bond Street. The Duke leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. Tell me everything. Every detail you remember. So Alara did. She spoke of the Baroness's furtive conversations, the way she'd cultivated friendships with Lady Catherine and Lord Reginald Blackwood, the Duke's political rival. She described the Baroness's increasing desperation as the engagement announcement approached, the anger barely concealed beneath aristocratic manners. She wanted to stop your marriage, Alara concluded. But I couldn't understand why she cared so deeply, until I heard her arguing with Lord Blackwood in the library 2 weeks ago. They spoke of eliminating the obstacle and securing the inheritance. I didn't understand then, but now it's clear. Lady Catherine is Blackwood's niece. If I died before producing an heir, my title and lands would revert to my cousin, who happens to be Blackwood's political ally." The Duke's face had gone cold with fury. "They plan to kill me, let Catherine inherit through marriage claims, and control my estate through her. And the Baroness? Blackwood's mistress, according to my investigators, promised a substantial payment and a house in Bath for her cooperation." Elara closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the casual cruelty of it. They would have killed him for money and power, and she would have been dismissed or imprisoned for trying to prevent it. "You've given me more than evidence," the Duke said softly. "You've given me a lesson I should have learned long ago. I've been blind, Miss Ashton. Blind to the world right in front of me, to the people who make my comfortable life possible. You saw what I didn't because I never bothered to look." He stood, pacing to the window. "That changes now." Over the next week, as Elara slowly regained her strength, Thornfield Manor transformed into the center of an investigation that scandalized all of London. The Duke hired private investigators, interviewed servants personally, and methodically built a case against his would-be murderers. Elara, confined to bed rest but increasingly restless, became an unexpected consultant. The Duke visited daily, bringing documents for her review, asking her observations about the people involved. She found herself explaining the invisible world of servants, how information flowed through the household, which alliances existed below stairs, who could be trusted to tell truth versus what the nobility wanted to hear. The scullery maid, Mary, she saw the Baroness at the apothecary too. Elara told him one afternoon, "But she's terrified to speak. Her family depends on her wages. If she's dismissed for making accusations, then I'll guarantee her position and a raise in wages for her testimony." The Duke made a note. "Anyone who comes forward with truth will be protected and rewarded. The days of servants being punished for honesty are over in this household." The evidence mounted like stones in a wall. Forged letters between the conspirators, recovered from the Baroness's rooms. Financial records showing suspicious payments from Lord Blackwood to the Baroness. The apothecary's testimony about selling arsenic to a fine lady, matching the Baroness's description. The footman Michael's statement about being manipulated into positioning the tea service. But the most damning evidence was Elara herself. Dr. Whitmore had documented every symptom, every stage of the poisoning and recovery. Her near-death became scientific proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. "They're calling for a formal assembly," the Duke told her on the 7th day. "The Lord Chancellor himself wants to hear the evidence. It will be a trial in all but name." Elara's hands twisted in the sheets. "Will I have to testify?" "Only if you're strong enough. I won't force you." He sat on the edge of the bed, a shocking breach of propriety that had become routine between them. "But Elara, your testimony would be powerful. You're the victim and the witness. Your voice matters. Your voice matters." For words that Elara had never expected to hear in her lifetime. "I'll testify," she said quietly. "I didn't survive poison just to hide in silence now." The Duke smiled. A real smile, warm and genuine. "You're extraordinary. You know that." Elara felt heat rise in her cheeks. This man, this Duke who could have anyone, was looking at her like she mattered, like she was worth something beyond her labor. It was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. The formal assembly was held in Thornfield Manor's Grand Hall, transformed into something between a courtroom and a theater. Every noble family of consequence attended, drawn by scandal and the unprecedented nature of the proceeding. A duke's near assassination, conspirators from within his own social circle, and at the center of it all, a housemaid turned heroine. Elara entered on the Duke's arm, still weak but determined. She wore a simple dress, the best she owned, that marked her clearly as a servant among the silks and jewels surrounding them. The whispers started immediately. "That's her. So small to have caused such chaos. Drinking poison, Can you imagine? The Lord Chancellor called the assembly to order. The Duke presented his evidence methodically. The poisoned teapot, Dr. Whitmore's analysis, the financial records, the witness statements. Each piece built upon the last until the conspiracy stood revealed in all its calculated cruelty. Baroness Vivian sat in the defendant's section, her earlier elegance replaced by tight-lipped fury. Beside her, Lady Catherine looked pale and frightened. Lord Blackwood maintained an expression of aristocratic disdain, but his fingers trembled slightly. "Let the record show," the Lord Chancellor intoned, "that arsenic was definitively found in the teapot from which the Duke's cup was to be filled. The amount would have been fatal within the hour." Then it was Alara's turn to speak. She stood before the assembled nobility, people who would normally never acknowledge her existence, and told her story. She described seeing the Baroness pour poison into the tea, the impossible choice that followed, the decision to drink it herself because her word alone would never be enough. "I knew I would be dismissed if I accused her," Alara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Or worse, servants who speak against their betters rarely fare well. So I offered the only proof I had, my own body, my own life." The hall was silent except for her words. "I don't regret it," she continued, "because silence would have meant watching an innocent man die while his murderers walked free. And I wouldn't be complicit in that, no matter the cost to myself." When she finished, the silence stretched. Then, unexpectedly, someone began to clap. Then another. Within moments, half the hall was applauding. An unprecedented show of support for a servant. The Baroness finally cracked. "She's lying." Vivian surged to her feet. "A scheming maid seeking attention and reward. You would believe this nobody over me? This nobody saved my life," the Duke said coldly. "Which is more than can be said for the Baroness who tried to end it." The Lord Chancellor called for order. Additional witnesses testified, the footman Michael, the scullery maid Mary, the apothecary. Each statement reinforced the truth. The conspiracy unraveled completely. By evening's end, Baroness Vivian, Lady Catherine, and Lord Blackwood were formally arrested. They would face trial in the Crown Court for attempted murder and conspiracy. As the assembly dispersed, the Duke turned to Alara. "It's over. Justice is served." But Alara could see in his eyes that something else was beginning. Something neither of them had words for yet. The scandal reverberated through London society for weeks. The arrest of a baroness for attempted murder was shocking enough. But the fact that she'd been exposed by a housemaid made the story irresistible. Newspapers published breathless accounts. Political cartoons depicted Alara as a modern-day David facing Goliath. The Duke found himself fielding endless questions from his peers. Why had he trusted a servant? Why elevate her testimony above nobility? Why, most scandalously, had he kept her in his private chambers during her recovery? It was Lord Pemberton, his longtime friend, who finally confronted him directly. "The whole of London is talking, Richard. They say you've become infatuated with a housemaid. Your engagement to Catherine is broken, admittedly for good reason, but people are questioning your judgment." The Duke stood at his study window, watching Alara walk slowly through the garden below. She'd recovered enough to move about, though she still tired easily. Even from this distance, he could see the quiet strength in the set of her shoulders. "Let me ask you something, James," the Duke said. "What makes a person noble? Birth? Title? The accident of being born into the right family? Tradition? Tradition is what let the Baroness believe she could murder me without consequence. Tradition is what made Alara believe she had to risk death to be heard." He turned from the window, his expression intense. "That girl has more honor in her smallest finger than most of the aristocracy possesses collectively. She saw wrong and acted to stop it, knowing the cost. That's nobility. Real nobility. You can't seriously be suggesting." "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating fact." The Duke's voice was firm. Our entire social structure is built on the premise that birth determines worth. But if that were true, the Baroness would be trustworthy and Alara would be insignificant. The evidence proves otherwise. He returned to his desk, pulling out a document he'd been drafting. I'm proposing reforms, starting with this household and extending to my holdings. Servants will have formal contracts with guaranteed rights. They'll have channels to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. They'll be educated, yes, educated, so they have opportunities beyond service. Lord Pemberton stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. You'll be ostracized. Then I'll be ostracized with a clear conscience. The Duke set down his pen. Alara didn't save my life so I could return to blind comfort. She showed me a truth I'd been ignoring. The people we dismiss as invisible are often the only ones actually seeing clearly. That evening, he called for a final assembly, smaller this time, just his household staff. They gathered nervously and used to being summoned as a group. The Duke stood before them and for the first time really saw them. Individuals with names and stories, not just functions. You all know what happened, he began. One of your own saved my life through extraordinary courage. But that shouldn't be extraordinary. The fact that Miss Ashton felt she had to risk death to be believed reveals a profound failure. My failure in how this household operates. He outlined his reforms clearly. Rights, protections, education opportunities. The staff exchanged shocked glances. These changes start immediately. And they start because Miss Ashton proved that character isn't determined by class. It's determined by choices. He paused. Thank you for your service. Your real service, not just the work you do, but the dignity you maintain while doing it in a system that often denies your humanity. The speech spread through London's servant networks within days. Other nobles began questioning their own practices. Reform movements gained momentum. But the Duke barely noticed the larger implications. His attention remained fixed on Alara, who was growing stronger daily, and who he realized he couldn't imagine his life without. 1 month after the poisoning, on the anniversary of the day she'd saved his life, the Duke found Alara in the garden where she'd taken to walking during her recovery. The roses were in full bloom, their perfume heavy in the summer air. She stood by the fountain, trailing her fingers in the water, looking more peaceful than he'd ever seen her. The sunlight caught in her dark hair, and something in his chest tightened. Miss Ashton. She turned, smiling when she saw him. Over the weeks of her recovery, they'd fallen into an easy friendship that scandalized the household. He'd taught her to read Latin. She'd taught him to see his own house through servants' eyes. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. But friendship wasn't what made his heart race now. Your Grace. She curtsied, a habit she couldn't break despite his repeated requests that she stop. I need to ask you something. He moved closer, suddenly nervous in a way he'd never been before. What are your plans? Now that you've recovered? Alara's smile faltered slightly. I suppose I'll return to service. Though perhaps not here. The scandal. Forget the scandal. He took her hand, a breach of propriety he no longer cared about. I'm asking about your life. What do you want? She stared at their joined hands, clearly flustered. What I want. My lord, I'm a maid. What I want has never particularly mattered. It matters to me. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning. Alara's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. I've spent this past month learning who you are, the Duke continued. Your courage, obviously, that I learned the night you drank poison. But also your kindness, your sharp mind, the way you see the world clearly while everyone around you operates in comfortable delusion. I've learned that you're terrible at embroidery but excellent at strategy. That you love poetry but hide it. That you see me, not my title or wealth or power, but me. My lord, I don't. Richard. He said it firmly. My name is Richard, and I'm not your lord. I'm just a man who realized something important. He dropped to one knee in the garden, and Alara gasped. I realized that I don't want a duchess chosen for political advantage or social standing. I want a partner, an equal, someone who'll tell me truth even when it's dangerous. Someone whose character isn't determined by birth but by choice. He pulled a ring from his pocket. Not the elaborate engagement ring he'd given to Catherine, but something simpler, more honest. I want you, Alara Ashton, not as my maid or my ward or my charity case. As my wife, my Duchess. Tears streamed down Alara's face. You can't be serious. The scandal would destroy you. Let it. I'd rather be destroyed for loving someone worthy than preserved by pretending I don't. He remained kneeling, holding the ring up to her. I'm not asking you to accept out of gratitude or obligation. I'm asking because over this past month, I've fallen in love with you. Completely. Irrevocably. I'm a maid, she whispered. You're extraordinary. And if the world can't see that, then the world is blind. He smiled. Besides, you saved my life. Marrying you is actually quite practical when you think about it. That startled a laugh out of her through her tears. Practical? Very. I need someone who'll keep me from being poisoned. You've proven yourself eminently qualified. Alara looked at him. This duke who'd spent a month nursing her back to health, who'd restructured his entire household to protect people like her, who was now kneeling in a garden proposing marriage as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The Tun will never accept me, she said quietly. Then we'll create a new society, one where worth is earned, not inherited. He stood, still holding her hand. But I need to know, Alara, not what you think you should say, but what you want. If you refuse me, I'll respect it. I'll ensure you have whatever life you choose. But if there's any chance you might love me too. She kissed him before he could finish. It was brief and awkward and absolutely perfect. When they broke apart, both breathless, Alara was smiling through her tears. I've loved you since you sat by my bedside reading poetry you thought I couldn't hear. Since you listened to servants' testimony like it mattered. Since you looked at me like I was worth seeing. He slipped the ring onto her finger. Then marry me. Scandal be damned. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in Thornfield Manor's chapel. Half of society attended to support them. The other half attended to witness the scandal firsthand. But as Richard and Alara stood before the archbishop, speaking vows that bridged two worlds, something shifted. Alara became the Duchess of Thornfield, not because she was born to it, but because she'd earned it through courage, character, and love. The servants wept openly. Several lords grumbled. And a few progressive nobles began rethinking their own assumptions about class and worth. As they emerged from the chapel as husband and wife, Alara, who had been invisible for 19 years, found herself the center of attention for the rest of her life. But this time, she wasn't invisible because society refused to see her. She was impossible to ignore because she dared to make them look. And in looking, they discovered that sometimes the truest nobility comes not from bloodlines or titles, but from the simple, radical act of choosing courage over comfort, truth over safety, and love over convention. The maid who'd drunk poison to save a duke became a duchess who changed England. All because one night, she refused to stay silent in the shadows. The end. Dear viewer, what part of this journey touched your heart or surprised you today? If you'd enjoy more historical love stories filled with healing and hope, let me know below. Please like, subscribe, and share to help others find these stories too. Thank you for spending your precious time here. In a world full of judgment, she chose devotion. If you believe that true character outshines social status, let's hear from you in the comments. Subscribe to turn the page with us on more stories where the ordinary becomes extraordinary and love conquers all. Your next beautiful story is waiting on the screen.